morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and in love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and in love. Good morning, sun.
Good morning to you. Happy Saturday. I am low on coffee, so I will try to make this not too long. So this is a discussion of what I might call holistic troubleshooting. And you can call it other things, which I'll mention, but it's the concept of taking a step back, looking at what's going on, sometimes called the bigger picture, and just understanding that you may not be seeing all the pieces of the puzzle. And it's almost like a cognitive blindness where you see just what's in front of you. And unless you know all the surrounding parts and kind of understand the concept that these parts come into play, you can completely miss the bigger picture and not actually solve the bigger problem that's sitting right in front of you. So a great there are many parallels to this, but there is a great YouTube channel called HVACR Videos. And HVAC, I don't know if that term is used elsewhere, but in the United States, HVAC is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So anything with duct work, your air conditioner, your heater, keeping your house or business warm or cold, refrigerators, that's often referred to as HVAC. And so this guy has an incredible channel on YouTube, HVACR Videos, and every single episode, he shares with you a service call that he's had. He does commercial work, so restaurants, bars, office buildings, shopping centers, things like that. And he preaches a philosophy called big picture diagnoses. And he says, look, the customer's complaining about this. We go out to the unit, we look at this, and we kind of see a symptom. But he's like, hey, don't just try to troubleshoot that symptom. Look at the big picture. Look at the big picture diagnosis of what you're dealing with here. And, this interconnects with that. And this may not be working, but why is that? Why is this one component not working? And how does that relate to the overall system that's in place in this facility? So fantastic videos. You don't have to know anything about HVAC. You don't necessarily have to be interested in HVAC. And I'm just watching these videos and watching how he goes about troubleshooting. And it's a fantastic just metaphor for how to assist customers who are having problems. And he'll often take troubleshooting or service calls where his own tech, went out once or twice sometimes and was unable to find the problem. And they're like, I don't know how to solve this problem. It just doesn't work. And they'll replace this part or that part, and it still doesn't work. So he then has to come out and do the big picture diagnosis and figure out what's wrong. And he shows you that entire process. And often he doesn't know what the solution is, but he walks through the steps of figuring that out. And half the time he's like, I don't get it. Why isn't this working? And he's constantly asking questions. So his mantra is big picture diagnoses. And you can't just solve a symptom. You can't just solve this one obvious problem. Even if you think that's the solution, look at the bigger picture. And he even has t-shirts on his website that he sells, big picture diagnoses. So fantastic, process, and that's the background of what I'd like to talk about. So 2 weeks ago, I had an electrical problem. So this is a photo of two exterior electrical outlets on the side of my house, and this is the new version. I apparently didn't take a photo of the old ones, but one of the outlets just wouldn't work. We weren't getting power on it. The device plugged into the outlet wasn't working. And this had happened a couple of times before. And so I said, oh, okay, let me go over and reset the outlets. So these are US style or North American style. They're called GFI, Ground Fault Interrupt, or GFIC. And they have a little circuit in there where if they detect a short to ground, then they will trip. They have their own little kind of circuit breaker of sorts. And if they detect a certain type of fault, they will trip and turn off. And so that's happened once or twice. And I thought, oh, well, there's a motor connected to this. Sometimes motors can have an arc, and that can result in a fault that causes these to trip. So you need to reset them. So that happened a couple times, but I didn't think further about it. I'm like, oh, okay, it's just tripping because of the motor. So then I thought, okay, well, it's not resetting now. I went to reset it. It wouldn't reset at all. And there's a little light on the bottom, and it's like nothing. There's no green light. There's no red light. There's no blinking. There's nothing. So I'm trying to reset it, and I'm thinking, okay, this is not resetting. That's weird. Now, I've had cases where these particular type of outlets will trip and they can't be reset. They're just dead. Like they get fried or whatever happens, trip too many times, I don't know. But sometimes they do just die and they need to be replaced. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, maybe this thing just died. But in the back of my head, I'm like, something's weird here. So then that was the bottom outlet that you see in this photo. But the top outlet wasn't working either. And you can obviously see they're connected there. So I'm like, but the bottom outlet is tied to the switch you see, that timer switch. The top outlet is not. The top outlet is on a constant power source and it's always on. And I'm thinking, what is going on? The top outlet won't work either. I go to reset it. That one, I go to reset and it instantly trips. There is a light on there and it's normally green, but when I go to reset it, it turned red and then tripped off. So it's telling me there is a fault. You can't tell what the fault is, but whatever is happening, it's instantly faulting out, saying, nope, I cannot be reset. And I think it was actually fried as well, but it had a little more life left in it. At least it was telling me it was faulting and couldn't be reset. Like, okay, what are the odds that two electrical outlets die simultaneously? One can't be reset, the other's faulting out. Like, this is weird. This is not just this outlet happened to die. These are two bad outlets. I have a bigger problem, right? So this started with one outlet not working. Now it's spread to two outlets not working. You're starting to see the picture grow, right? So I'm like, okay, let me just take a look, see if there's anything obvious. So I unscrew the front of the bottom outlet fixture, and as I'm taking the screws out, they are rusted. Now, when you're dealing with screws next to an electrical outlet and they are covered in rust, that's generally a bad sign. And so I'm thinking, okay, we have a problem here. There's enough water or moisture getting into this that the screws are covered in rust. Wow, I don't think I've ever seen that before. I mean, obviously interior outlets don't typically have this problem, and I've never seen it on an exterior outlet as well. And these are outdoor rated, they're covered, it's like, what's going on? So several screws are rusted. Clearly there's been water buildup in these. So I take it off enough just to see in the bottom of the electrical box. The entire bottom of the electrical box has corrosion, like this entire layer of corrosion. The ground wire and ground screw is completely corroded. Obviously, there's been significant water ingress into the entire electrical box. And I step back, I'm like, okay, something else is going on there. So it's not just that I needed to replace the electrical outlet. It's not that it was faulty. Now I have 2 outlets. I see there's water in there. Okay, I'm out. Like, I could replace stuff, but these were installed by an electrician. I'm just going to call the same electrician and have them deal with it. So I call them. The guy comes out and he's like, yeah, that's a problem. There's water in there. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, well, it's probably the seal's gone bad. It's been 2014, something like that. So 8 years, 8 years, something like that. So it's like, okay, fine, but it still seemed pretty strange because there's a lot of water. So he replaces these plastic bubbles. He replaces the outlet. He rewires everything. And he says, well, let me drill a weep hole in the bottom. Well, what does a weep hole in the bottom of an electrical box do? It lets water drain out. Think about that. You're putting a hole in the bottom of the electrical box to let the water drain out. See a problem there? Okay. Well, he also said, well, let me, put some caulk on here. So he had some old latex caulk that was all dried up. So he's smearing the stuff around there. 1, not the appropriate caulk to use. 2, he didn't do a very good job. So that was useless. So I went out there after he left, cleaned it up, wiped it down, and you see that there's some white caulk there. That's what he did. I went and smeared, I bought some silicone caulk and sealed up everything I could. And you'll notice whoever designs these electrical outdoor boxes, like, what were you thinking? The red arrows show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 entire surfaces that could allow water to get in. Like, horrible design, right? So I'm, masking this off. I'm putting a bead of caulk. I'm trying to, smooth it across and seal up all these things as best I can, getting in the nooks and crannies. So I've sealed everything off. When I'm done, I stood back and I said, duh. Now, you may not notice, but if you have a sharp eye, take a look at this. Can you tell what the problem is? And think about this in the big picture, the whole big picture diagnosis concept. The electrician replaced the outlets, fixed the problem. He replaced these covers. He replaced the gaskets, replaced the boxes. And I went around and I caulked and sealed up everything I could. You notice what we're missing? We didn't stand back. In this case, literally stand back 5 feet and take a look at what the situation is. Well, if you stand back 5 feet and you look at the literal bigger picture, what do you see? You might notice that there's a conduit coming into the top of this box, and that conduit has an exterior light on it, which has its own box, which has its own seals, which has its own likely faulty or incorrectly installed weatherproofing or lack thereof. Well, gravity, water, what's a potential place where water could be just pouring into this electrical box? Because if I look at this, I'm like, how can I get 1/2 inch of water into this electrical box through these little things? Like, I just didn't get it. Like, the physics really just didn't support what I was seeing. Maybe that was the case. I don't know. Maybe there was a lot of rain hitting the side of my house. But when I stood back and I look at this, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So I didn't see it. The electrician didn't see it. We didn't literally take a step back and look at this overall picture. So I've sealed up the lower boxes. Now I need to go out, look at that light, take it apart, seal up everything there, see if there's, water ingress in there, and, caulk it up. I don't know if that's a problem or not, but I'm certainly going to seal it up just in case, because I'm guessing this cost me at least $200 to have the electrician come out. The outlets were down for a week, and it's just a pain in the butt, more than the cost. I don't want to deal with this hassle. So there's kind of a parable about this. I don't know the genesis. I don't know if this is, where this comes from, but from what I could tell, it's generally called like the blind men and the elephant. Like 3 men go with blindfolded or blind, and they touch an elephant, and one touches the trunk, one touches the tusk or the ears, one touches the tail, and one says, "Oh, this is just a big rat. This is a weapon," and whatever, because that's all they can feel based on where they're standing. And anyone who's standing 5 feet away says, "This is an elephant," and these people that are touching little pieces of the elephant are misdiagnosing or misdescribing the situation. So that's kind of what it reminded me of. And so unless you're standing back and looking at the big picture, you can completely misdiagnose what's going on. And you can spend all this time and effort thinking you're fixing the problem when the problem is completely outside of the task you're working on, right? So let's bring this back to software. So I get calls. I've had a few in the last couple of weeks. Why is your app so unreliable? Why is your software so unreliable, Steve? It's logging all these errors. Yes, my application is logging errors. Now, I can tell you that I can have my application running on my VM processing literally millions of applications nonstop, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it will not generate a single error. And I've been doing this for over 12 years now with this application, hundreds of millions of transactions processed by hundreds and hundreds of customers. And I can tell you that the application is fundamentally reliable. So I know that. The customer doesn't necessarily know that. So when I get a call and someone asks me, why is your application so unreliable? I'm fairly confident it's not my application fundamentally. Now, my application may have a fault that we need to diagnose. That does happen occasionally. Even after 12 years, we do find an occasional very obscure bug that's an edge case or, some weird scenario that triggers a bug or legitimate error in our application that we have to resolve. But when someone says that I'm getting a slew of errors from your application, it's horribly unreliable, I'm like, well, I think it's not really our application. Something else is going on here. So I get on the phone with the customer, and it's just error after error. Like throughout the day, randomly, I'm like, whoa, this is weird. What's going on? And so we restart it, we get it up and running, but I say, look, can we have a call with whoever can access your SQL Server? I'd like to take a look at your SQL Server logs because my application connects with a SQL Server. And this is an on-prem application. This is not Business Central related. It's an on-prem application that talks to an on-prem ERP system, which is running on SQL Server. So my application talks directly to the SQL Server. It also runs a process application in the background that also talks to SQL Server. So whether it's my application, the dependent process, both of those talk to SQL Server, and they need constant communication. If there is any connectivity issue between those, my application will immediately log that as an error. So the customer says, well, why is your application having constant SQL connection errors? Well, it's not. It's just logging that we're having connectivity errors, and it's an environmental issue that my app cannot connect to the customer's SQL Server. So there's reliability issues, and it's not a reliability issue with my app. It's a reliability issue indicating a problem between my app and the SQL Server or with the SQL Server. So I know that. The customer doesn't know that. So I get on the call with this customer, and they bring in an IT resource or their DBA who's able to connect to the SQL Server. And we look through the logs, and I say, look, we want to look at these specific timestamps because that's when errors occurred in my application. So the DBA pulls up the SQL Server logs, and after some searching and filtering, this is what we see. SQL Server has encountered an occurrence of an I/O request taking longer than 15 seconds to complete on this file. And the file is either the MDF or the LDF on the SQL Server. Think about that. SQL Server is having over 15-second delay trying to read or write to a SQL Server MDF or LDF file on disk. 15 seconds. Like, that's a glacial eternity in terms of SQL Server. Imagine submitting a request to a SQL Server and waiting 15 seconds or more, and maybe that request completes, maybe it doesn't, but like, that's an eternity. So my application is recording an execution timeout, which means it waited over 60 seconds for that simple query to complete. And even after 60 seconds, the query just gives up. It's like, hey, I tried. After a minute, I'm giving up. And you see this screenshot? That's just one small snippet of what's going on this server, because we were just looking at one log that only went back to November of 2021. So since November, this customer has had constant errors of this type where the I/O was not working at all for the SQL Server, and SQL Server saying, hey, I'm trying to write to disk, but I literally can't. I'm getting no response. I'm unable to access this file. So there's my application, and I'm thinking, well, you have a SQL Server issue. Well, SQL Server says, hey, it's not my fault. I'm trying, man. I'm telling you that the disk, the I/O is your problem here. So the picture keeps getting bigger and bigger, right? So the customer says, my app is unreliable. And I say, your SQL Server is unreliable. The SQL Server DBA says, it's not my fault. The SQL Server is doing its job. It's the infrastructure team who maintains the storage for our VMs. It's their problem. So you see the scope of this problem is growing, right? So the more we stand back, the bigger this problem gets. So I'm like, well, there's your problem, most likely. Like, I'll give it a 50-50, right? I'm going to guess it's greater than 50%, but I told the customer, maybe this is the issue. Excuse me. Maybe this is the issue, maybe it's not, but you really need to resolve this before we bother troubleshooting my application, because you have some serious reliability issues with your SQL Server. So then I got some feedback, because this is what I tweeted. I said, this is what SQL Server crying for help looks like. And I did hashtag tired of on-prem. The reason I did that is because I see this every single day. I see customers who have on-prem systems that are not maintained well. And it's not my application. Jeez. It's not my application that has the problem. It's their infrastructure. And it's network connectivity. It's SQL Server. It's log files full. It's email doesn't work. It's network outage. It's server reboots. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Like, anyone who's maintained IT infrastructure knows there are just dozens of dependencies that you got to deal with. And I'm dealing with every single one. Group policy objects, like things stop working, antivirus. I have customers who have this super aggressive security monitoring software. It'll literally roll back files. It'll roll back schema changes to the database that haven't been approved and put through a deployment process. And so the IT guy says, oh, let me install your update. We install the update. The security software comes through the next night, rolls back everything and wipes out all the changes. It's like, and this guy doesn't even know that. And so it's like, come on. So I said, I'm tired of on-prem. I'm just tired of dealing with these things, because 90+% of the time, it is not a problem with my application. 90+% of the time, I'm helping a customer troubleshoot issues in their own infrastructure and environment that have nothing to do with my application. My application is just a casualty of their poor infrastructure. And so a response I received, effectively, the way I read it, are you implying this doesn't happen in the cloud? One moment. So that wasn't my intent at all. I just see this a lot in on-prem. But if you look at this question, are you implying this doesn't happen in the cloud? Like, I'm assuming this person has an on-prem focus, and it's like, this has nothing to, well, it does. So I see this a lot in on-prem. So I'm happy to go to a SaaS provider that doesn't have these issues. And the question is the wrong question. It's not about on-prem versus cloud. That small picture. If you think of the big picture, let's think about the context here. This is what the customer said to me when they said, my application is unreliable. Our servers are mission critical. So I said, is there a chance your SQL Server was having Windows Update system maintenance and was rebooted at 12:30 p.m. or a.m. in the middle of the night, and that's what's causing our connection issues? And the person said, no, we don't reboot our servers. Our servers are mission critical. We're a public company. We can't have downtime. Okay, really? Well, that's interesting. And it's interesting, the concept of, we look in 30 seconds, we look in their SQL Server logs that haven't been looked at since before November. It's probably been going on for over a year. And we see critical errors in the SQL Server log that no one is monitoring. This is a $1.1 billion public company. We don't reboot servers. We can't have downtime. This company has over 4,000 employees. And it's so big that we have an application person. We then had a call with the SQL Server person. Once we identified the issues, even that SQL Server person says, I'm out. This is out of my scope. We need to contact the infrastructure team. They have an entire department that deals with server infrastructure. Okay, so this is not an on-prem issue versus cloud issue. This is an issue where a $1.1 billion company with an entire infrastructure team doesn't even look at their server logs for critical errors. And they're relying on some joker in Los Angeles in his home office, which is a converted dining room, to point out the fact that their super important critical infrastructure has been screaming pleas of help for months, and no one has looked at it. That's the problem. It has nothing to do with on-prem versus cloud. It has to do with the bigger picture. So what does it take for a $1.1 billion company to ignore their servers? The infrastructure team, the DBA, the application administrators, no one is monitoring what's going on. And I see this all the time on-prem infrastructure. When I sign up with Microsoft to use a Microsoft SaaS solution like Business Central, I'm assuming that someone is monitoring the servers. I happen to know that the Business Central team does monitor telemetry. And I don't know how many teams monitor what level of telemetry, but they at least have folks monitoring application level telemetry. Now, are they perfect? No. But at least I know they have systems in place. This $1.1 billion company with over 4,000 people and departments galore is clearly not monitoring what's going on. They're having outages in their critical server infrastructure with no one realizing what's happening. How does this happen? And it's up to me to start asking questions because my application is being blamed for reliability issues. So that's the context. That's why on-prem versus cloud is the wrong question to be asking. And like, if you think about it from a bigger picture perspective, there's my little old application. It runs on a server. It relies on a database server. That database server relies upon storage. Well, there's also all sorts of networking components in between my application server, that server, and the database and its storage. Lots of network infrastructure. Maybe the database is using a SAN. You have that infrastructure, right? And then there's telemetry. SQL Server's logging away. It's doing its job, but no one is being notified of these critical errors. So unless you're taking a look at this entire picture, application reliability is irrelevant. Okay, so that's why I'm using the term holistic. Now you can use big picture. That's a nice simple way of thinking about it. But I kind of prefer the term holistic, relating to or concerned with complete systems, rather than with the analysis of, treatment of, or dissection into parts. You can't just look at your little application. You have to understand that your application runs on a server. It interacts with other applications. Those rely on network, rely on storage. You have telemetry, you have notifications. Problems can occur in any one of those places. So you want to look at the complete system whenever possible. And that requires some awareness that there even is a complete system. The application consultant or support person I spoke with, that person only sees the application. I brought in a conversation with the SQL Server person. That person only sees the SQL Server. That person had no idea what our application did. When we finally pointed out the storage issue, that person says, that's out of my realm. We need to throw it over the transom to the storage people. So these people are dealing with their silos, and there's no one minding the entire holistic system of their environment. I mean, maybe they're supposed to be, but clearly there's a problem at the higher level where those systems are not working well together. So just an example of some real world situations that I deal with every single day where a billion-dollar public company does not have its act together and I somehow have to get involved to help them fix their overall infrastructure. It just blows my mind. So with that, when you're trying to troubleshoot an error, realize that an application error can be due to a dependency, an ancillary system, overall infrastructure, lots of different places. And when you're seeing really strange behavior that you've never seen before, I'm pretty comfortable that it's not my application. Then the real challenge becomes, okay, what in this overall system could be causing this? And it could be multiple things. And it's often difficult to troubleshoot. So it takes time, it takes multiple departments, multiple people. So with that, hope that was helpful. Hopefully that made sense. And yeah, have a good weekend. Drink some good coffee. Enjoy.
Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great